these large language models in an enterprise setup will facilitate a more natural interaction with data, information, and insights. And that, for such a company, is transformative, because what you can now suddenly do is you can effectively let people discover what they need to know, what they could do before if they are experts in search, but now they don't need to become that. They can remain experts in electric transformers and let the tech do the rest. And that will, I think, fundamentally change the way businesses will operate.
I've spent quite a lot of my life working on the technologies itself. So the thing that actually excites me, but as well as scares me the most at the same time, is the current speed of innovation in this space. In the last few months, the industry has managed to take this technology from a research lab to the mainstream media. And this is, of course, very exciting to see from a technology development point of view. We see more and more adoption of this in different products, applications, and bigger companies. But at the same time, it's also important to understand that a lot of the core challenges associated with the technology, like hallucinations, like models ignoring the security guardrails, are not that well understood in the community right now. But given the race we are in, and everyone kind of trying to get there first, this, I feel, sometimes is a bit ignored in the overall context. So yeah, that's the thing that excites me, but at the same time scares me a bit at the same time.
Hi everyone, it's Lauren Hawker-Zaffer. Welcome back to Redefining AI, the tech podcast. I'm an educator and I'm taking you on an educational exploration. Today, we will be spotlighting the effect that the explosive mainstream spread of ChatGPT has had. We will question if this is a transformative moment in tech and how the widespread introduction of machine learning will affect you. Where can generative AI be used best in a safe manner, and how can the stochastic parrot, more commonly known as a large language model, be tamed and widely profited from in an enterprise environment? After all, generative AI is a foundational technology with extensive capabilities that are going to expand the runway on top-line growth in many sectors dramatically. So let's jump in and explore this topic with our two special guests. Today we have Dorian Selz, the CEO of Squirro, and Saurabh Jain, the CTO of Squirro. So welcome, Dorian. Welcome, Saurabh. It's wonderful to have two well-informed individuals on the show with us today, and to have the unique opportunity to explore this topic from two integral perspectives. Hi there, welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
How are we today?
You're all right. How are you?
Thank you for asking. Yeah, I'm also enjoying the wonderful sunshine that we've been blessed with in Zurich today. So let's kick off the session with the same question to each of you, as this question will provide, in my opinion, our audience with a little personal insight. What excites you most nowadays about the space that we're working in, Dorian?
I think it is the equivalent of a Google moment, a bit like 25 years ago. I vividly remember back in 96, 97, where kind of like on the cover at the time still, you were given an insight, or better say a first sight at what Google did in search. People here on the podcast might remember the days when there was Alta Vista and other such search engines, often covered with lots of ads and okay results. And there was even research out there that said, search is dead. Alta Vista owns it. Comes along a slick, simple user interface called Google that literally overnight took the world by storm and replaced for good the way we interact with information. Today, I have a bit of feeling it's a bit the same thing. What ChatGPT did is not some novel technology per se, but because the technology, and probably you still going to expand on that, has been around for a while. But what they've done is they simplified it to an extent that it is now available for everyone and also comprehensible for everyone. You don't need to go and explain what deep learning is. You simply go and ask a question and get a relevant answer back most of the times, not all of the times. We're going to speak about the hallucination of the whole space a bit in a moment. And with that, they created sort of the same set there is a moment before, where everybody in the tech industry was maybe talking about machine learning and deep learning and all the rest of it. And there is a moment now after where the whole world understands that this is a technological moment of significance, where the world will change rapidly in the way it adopts that type of technology into everyday use.
Mm-hmm. And what changes do you foresee in that? Is it the simplification, the accessibility that you've mentioned? What do you see as a primary opportunity and driver here?
I do obviously look at it from a perspective of how to make such technologies applicable in an enterprise setup. I don't look at it so much at how it's usable for a consumer. So my answer will be a bit focused on how large businesses, small businesses, and anyone in between can make use of these technologies. I think what will fundamentally change over the next few years is how large, mid, and small organizations consume, interact, and especially act on the throes of information that they today possess, but quite often don't use for clever decision making. The simplification that you see with this type of interfaces that you see today is an ability that you don't need to be a super expert in search. You don't need to be a super expert in Boolean query logic, but you literally can talk to the system and the system talks cleverly back to you. If you do a few things, and we're probably going to expand in this podcast about this in an enterprise setup, and that will radically change the way people interact with information. And if you can condense information into actual insight in the way businesses will be operated. I would though make one remark, right? 25 years ago, when Google came along, and nobody at the time, I would say, realized that this was the end of newspapers as we would know them. What I want to say with that is it was a simple technology at the time, better search. What nobody realized is the profound economic consequences of the eventually to emerge business model, which in case of Google, as we all know, is advertisement. And literally within about 15 years, they displaced what was before the supreme king in advertisement, namely the newspaper industry, and became themselves the largest advertisement merchant on the planet. And today you can look a bit at Google as an ad platform with by coincidence, still a search engine somewhere. And what I wonder is, on that same analogy, is I think it is not only useful just to look at the technology today, because no one, I believe, today has a full understanding of what the equivalent of that Google moment is in its consequence. Where is the business model? Where is, as an example, the change it has on the way we interact with data? And I think that is something that we're going to explore over the next 2, 3, 4 years. We have a few ideas, but will those win or will others win? We're going to see.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. We're definitely going to see. So if we pass over the same question to yourself, Saurabh, is there a similar excitement?
So I've spent quite a lot of my life working on the technologies itself. So the thing that actually excites me, but as well as scares me the most at the same time, is the current speed of innovation in this space. In the last few months, the industry has managed to take this technology from a research lab to the mainstream media. And this is, of course, very exciting to see from a technology development point of view. We see more and more adoption of this in different products, applications, and bigger companies. But at the same time, it's also important to understand that a lot of the core challenges associated with the technology, like hallucinations, like models ignoring the security guardrails, are not that well understood in the community right now. But given the race we are in, and everyone kind of trying to get there first, this I feel sometimes is a bit ignored in the overall context. So yeah, that's the thing that excites me, but at the same time scares me a bit at the same time.
In the list that you've mentioned there, do you think it's important that it's understood in the community?
Yes, I mean, I think that is also becoming clearer by the day. You see examples of the effects that it has on individuals when they're exposed to this side of the model. I don't want to name examples here, but you can easily go and Google the recent examples from Snap that was circulated, where the results of such a chatbot implemented by Snap was not accounting for some of these challenges and created a bit of backlash. So yeah, there's definitely some more work needed here to get there, right?
Mm-hmm. So before we go into the intrinsics and the nitty gritty of what we're actually tackling, I think that because we're tackling such a pronounced topic on the show today, namely generative AI and large language models, we need to sort of spearhead ourselves into helping our audience understand a couple of key definitions that are at play here. So what is generative AI? Because there is confusion around that as well. There's confusion of generative AI equals large language models equals ChatGPT. What is generative AI?
So traditionally, AI has never been associated with generating any new original content of any type. In the past, it was used for things like whether this email is a spam or not, or whether I'm going to like this recommended Amazon product or not. But nothing of the sort of here is an original piece of text, image, video, or even music that is in an ideal world not copied from existing data and really generated fresh from this technology. And so this is what generative AI is. As the name implies, the AI that is able or capable to generate new types of content without really copying it from other places. And you saw some of that last year also with Stable Diffusion, for example, that could generate images from described text. So it's not just limited to ChatGPT, which at least at the moment is only able to generate text. And you could foresee in the future also new models coming out, which can generate videos, for example, based on what you like and stuff like that. So yeah, so that's what generative AI is.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we could follow the path of trying to understand. I mean, you've mentioned in the past it was never associated with, well, AI was never associated with the generation of new or original content. It's something we could follow as to why this has come about or the emergence of it. But let's move and look at maybe what kind of data sets are used to train generative AI models.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the example that most people are familiar with right now is ChatGPT. So I can kind of focus on that a bit. So just to give you a bit of idea there, so GPT-3, which was the predecessor model for ChatGPT, that was pre-trained on a corpus of text from 5 major data sets. But it primarily included a large part of the broad web, Wikipedia, books, for example. So basically what is available in the open domain today as human language. Yeah, so this was a big jump from what it was before, because the model at the time was, this GPT-3 model at the time was 175 billion parameters in total, which if you compare it to the last iteration of such a model, which was GPT-2, was merely, and I say merely with air quotes here, was with 1.5 billion parameters. So it's a significant jump in one generation. Such a model right now needs about 800 gigabytes of space to just store these model weights. So it's really a very significant jump from the last generation.
So then we could move on to thinking about who can actually use a model like that then.
So this model right now is available for general public consumption already. So the way this model works is that it's very good at, given the size and the complexity of this model, these models are fairly general purpose and can be adopted to be used for a wide variety of tasks. You can use techniques like few-shot learning to make those models capable of doing tasks that are new and novel and are not originally used for training these models. But of course, that might always not be ideal because of the higher cost associated with running such a large model also.
Mm-hmm. So would it be better, or is it possible for an organization to build their own large language model? Would it be beneficial?
So at the moment, the current wave is focusing more towards using these models either by simply fine-tuning it on your additional enterprise data or simply using those models with additional contextual grounding without doing any other fine-tuning experiments. The reason being that training such a big model entirely from scratch is a big task to undertake. We don't know exactly what it took OpenAI to train such a model, but a similar effort from Facebook, for example, they published those results and they needed 1,000 880 gigabyte GPU cards that they probably used for a period of over 2 months. And the complexity of training such a model is evident by the fact that in this publication, they had a specific section about hardware failures, where they talk about how many times they have manually restarted their clusters and how many times they had to go and manually fix it. which from a company like Facebook, you would expect that that's all already a solved problem or taken care of. So at the moment, this probably is not the way to go to train your own large language model from scratch on your data.
Mm-hmm.
I would interject though. Here, what you say, obviously, you know that space much better, but maybe for the audience, right? We always make a mistake to assume the current to be the path to the future. And the IT sector is one of those sectors where this has been provably wrong as a way to look how the future will develop. Just one keyword here is Moore's law, right? If you go back 60 years, when this Moore's law was sort of formulated, it effectively said that the speed increases while the cost falls in a super simplified manner of Moore's law. And so it did. And the transformative impact of this was phenomenal. Whatever we do today with large language models without what was implicit in Moore's law, forget about that. Now, there is two elements that I would like to point out. About 20 years ago, everyone said Moore's law came to its natural conclusion because the chips could not be built smaller. The wafers could not be made denser. 20 years on, many clever things and many clever inventions later, Moore's law is still alive and kicking. And the transformative effects can be felt. Large language models, Saurabh just pointed it out, are possible because you have that new generation of chips called GPU that make this type of compute possible. So what I want to say is, let's assume just for a second that this type of element will also apply to the creation of large language models. You could easily foresee a future where not tomorrow, not the day after, but a few years down the road, the local training, the local application, and in that sense, also the local use, even eventually kind of like the trading of such models. I have a model that is super good at, as an example, industrial use cases versus the generic use cases that you can answer with GPT-4 today. That is a future that one can easily foresee to happen. So I think one of the elements to consider today for any maybe enterprise customer, small, medium, large, is how do I get started? Do I make a bet on throwing money at that early stage local generation of this because I think it's a competitive advantage, but then you're up against the arms of the big people with big deep pockets, like we just said it, Meta? Or do I make use of what's available today, but on that Moore's law trajectory, effectively find my sweet spot when I enter the race? And to go back to that analogy, NVIDIA wasn't part of the original class of chip producers, but is today the one driving force behind a lot of this. Mm-hmm. So there is a future that we do not yet foresee how it will happen. But today, what you said, today it's probably a good way to use what's around, to go and test, to go and deploy, to go and use.
Definitely. And I mean, as we've just mentioned with NVIDIA, there's certainly at least 5 different components of the actual layer of who will profit from this development in generative AI. And one of them are obviously the GPU card providers that are making this that are making the compute actually possible. So if you move on then into the organization, we're looking at the introduction of generative AI at this scale, not only for the tech industry, but for an organization. Dorian, maybe from a commercial perspective, what changes are happening and what implication and opportunity will that open up for an enterprise? And how would they identify that themselves?
I had early on today a meeting with a colleague of mine. He works for a very big company that produces all types of equipment in and around energy networks. This is a company that has its roots about 120 years ago. In its current form, though, it's a relatively novel creation. He told me they have an estimated 10,000 different share points in their company. They have, given it's an industry that's been around for a while and absolutely quintessential also what we discussed today, without electricity, no GPU, they have a workforce that is changing fast. They have a workforce, however, that for age reasons also is not versed into all the latest tech chismo, but has a lot of implicit knowledge about, transformers, not the AI type transformers, but the electricity type transformers, and the like. And he said to me, one of the most difficult pieces for him is if somebody new enters the company, how can they tap into that wide pool of implicit knowledge that's in this document, in that document, literally spread across 10,000 different SharePoints. Now, there are two things. Enterprise search has been around for a while, and we're part of that market, and we provide enterprise search solutions. But if we take a step back, and look at what we do today and how that whole space has been developed and has evolved, we do a fairly good job in taking all this data and structuring this data and making it available in a search type like interface. That said, however, such interfaces are really bad for people that join afresh such an organization. Why? A person that comes into a new into an organization afresh, she does not know anything about the internal lingo, about the internal way to describe products, etc., etc., etc. So how can she even search with traditional methods? I would not know what to search for in such a company. I might search for generic terms, but then I get a long result list. So if we take a bit of a self-reflective approach of what we do well and what we don't do that well is we structure data well, we make an easy to use interface available, all well, but we don't necessarily in the current incarnation do a good job at providing an interface that for an end user is so simplistic and so easy as to make it available to them in an everyday use fashion. And that's where the change comes. So these large language models in an enterprise setup will facilitate a more natural interaction with data, information, and insights. And that for such a company is transformative, because what we can now suddenly do is you can effectively let people discover what they need to know, what they could do before if they are experts in search, but now they don't need to become that. They can remain experts in electric transformers and let the tech do the rest. And that will, I think, fundamentally change the way businesses will operate.
Okay. Can we maybe look or expand in concrete examples of how it will change the way in which the business operates? I mean, we're forefront in this natural interaction that will provide an easier accessibility and relationship with data, information, insight. But how will that concretely affect the operations of a business?
We did recently a survey, and I think it's also available on our website for people interested, where we asked people that we are in touch with, but also made it available to everyone who wants to come. And we got a decent enough result set back to say this is kind of like points of direction. Maybe it's not academic level precision, but it's kind of like directionally relevant. And sort of what people tell us where they do see that immediately as useful within the company setup is knowledge management, the element I just spoke about. Mm-hmm. Make accessible to anyone in a company hidden insights through being able to interact much more naturally with the tech that allows them to discover these insights. So knowledge management. We also saw that there are two other elements that came up high up on that list. One is customer service. Anyone who has been on a support line and needs to wait and then talk to a first level support engineer that tried to do his job best, but might not understand what you really want, knows of the frustration. So to be able to, as an example, use such technology to streamline such experiences, 100%, I do see that. Another one I saw high up on that list was sales. Mm-hmm. Again, I can relate to that. You have a bigger company, a smaller company, and you have hundreds, thousands of customers. You have an account team that is pushed by their goals they need to achieve each quarter. So for a sales rep to be able to say in an interactive fashion, which are the 3 customers I should focus on today? The system in a natural way interacts with you and steers you towards those 3 customers that maybe deserve your time most, to avoid churn, to make a cross-sell, etc. I do see this immediately. That adds immediate top-line value. We also got a couple of other things. We also got mentions of risk and audit, compliance. Again, in a financial sector, I can very much relate to that. Tons of documents, KYC, and all those keywords you need to know about very specific elements. I can see that. And then sort of other elements where it was mentioned was legal, as an example, innovation and research and development, also market intelligence. recruitment, onboarding were other mentions where people see the applicability of this type of tech in their enterprises.
Mm-hmm. Certainly an excellent overview, and I do think that it is quite representative of the actual usability in an enterprise environment and where people can step in and actually start to use generative AI effectively. So just to recap, we've got knowledge management, customer services, sales, we've got the legal applicability. If we then sort of turn the curve and maybe go back to the technical perspective of what we're motioning at Squirro as well, there's a lot that is being spoken about in generative AI at the moment, especially that pertains to the positives that we've certainly highlighted, and there are a huge amount of positives. But we are also motioning certain things at Squirro that pertain to maybe what's not being spoken about and where we see opportunity for improvement. Can you touch upon these from a technical perspective as well?
Yeah, so there are definitely challenges with using this technology that I think are at least quite well known at this point. Things like hallucination, things like biases. This might not have been the case 2, 3, 4 months ago when the ChatGPT made its first splash, but I'm sure at this point, all of us have friends who have circulated a few screenshots of when Bing did not do a good job, or Microsoft, or Bing did not do a good job, for example, or let's say Google did not do a good job and stuff like that. So at this point, I think many people are aware of these problems. Many people are aware of the hallucination, of the biases in the data set. And this is also being reinforced by vendors coming out with these solutions. For example, if you look at the launch blog post of GPT-4 from OpenAI, they actively acknowledge that the GPT-4 still will have some hallucination problems, still will have bias problems. And even though they have made progress on it compared to the previous iterations, there's still a long way to go to really fill this gap. So I think there's enough things being talked about, but what I feel happens more is that we all talk about it, but when we put it in practice, we all forget to do something about it. And maybe that is something where we try to do it differently. Of course, this is all are very big topics, and we do not claim in any point or shape, in any form or shape, that we have solved the bias problem or we have solved the hallucination problem. But what we try to do with such systems at Squirro is that we try to be as transparent as possible to our end users, to the enterprise applications, so that we will kind of tell our users where the answers that are being generated from coming from, what is the source of these answers? What is the original document that contributed to this answer? So this at least is a transparent way to expose such issues. And at least we believe that this is a good first step to at least identify the cases where we have such problems and then go about fixing those.
Okay, so transparency in that sense would equal evidence, it would equal fact.
Yes. So transparency as in like, why did we come up with this answer? Which documents did we look at? And how we combine them to get to that answer? Because if we can systematically identify biases, for example, in those approaches and can get feedback from our end users on that, then this is something that we can improve.
Mm-hmm. What about yourself, Dorian? What opportunities do you see on the market that you find we're aligning our own identification as an organization that's working with generative AI? What would you express there?
I pause a bit and reflect a bit on that famous Einstein quip. There is only a certain thing about the future, that it is uncertain. And that maybe summarizes a bit what I think about this. Obviously, we here have a view on how to combine what we've been doing over the past years in information retrieval with large language models. Large language models in themselves are a bit like a jet engine, an absolute technological marvel, but on itself, pretty useless. You need an entire airframe around a jet engine to make it a plane and to transport people from, say, London to New York. And I feel it's a bit the same thing on our company level, right? We are the airframe. We have that information retrieval element. We can plug in any type of LLM. And with that, make what we discussed in this podcast available to small, medium, and large enterprises in novel ways and allow them to reap the benefits of better access to insights, better customer service, more closely aligned sales with customers and all that stuff. All worthwhile in itself. I'm a bit hesitant to talk about the larger implications. To draw back where we started a moment ago with this podcast, nobody really foresaw at the time one touched the first time search engines like Alta Vista and later on Google, what that evolution would be. And just to say out loud, about 3 years ago, the European Commission went after Google on the grounds that this became sort of a monopoly. 3 years later, we talk about Google being destroyed by the advent of LLMs replacing the traditional search. So with that, I keep it a bit with Einstein. The only real certain thing about the type of tech future we go into is that it's uncertain. I would not claim to know it better than anyone else in this podcast, what will happen in the next 5 years.
Mm-hmm. I would certainly agree. I think that there is an evolution happening, and we will, in the next few weeks, the few months, be following, and we will be part of the conversation. We will certainly, in time, discover how or if LLMs will replace search and to what extent. And I can only encourage everyone to stay around for the journey. So I'd like to thank you both for your insights and for sharing your thoughts today here on Redefining AI. Would you like to part with the final word?
Thanks a lot, Lawrence, for having us here. And it was definitely very insightful and interesting to also hear Dorian's point of view, which is always good to have. So, yeah.
Thank you, Saurabh, for insightful views on how the tech works. Thank you, Lauren, for setting this up. And to the audience, I encourage you, go experiment. The old mantra of try fast, fail fast, rinse and repeat to actually make that adoptable in your own setup. I think that's actually, at the moment, a real priority for a lot of people.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I'd like to thank everyone else for listening today. If you'd like to find out more about AI, ML, and search, then go to the Squirro Academy at learn.squirro.com.